please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome back to RotoWire's signature NHL Hockey Pod Puckcast with Statsman and AJ, brought to you with support from our pals at Owner's Box with their new way to enjoy fantasy sports. And I'm having a ball with that. We'll get into that in a little bit. Friends, I'm Paul Bruno in Toronto, Ontario, and you can follow me at Statsman22. My co-host is AJ Scholes, who's a great follower, AJ Scholes 24, and back in his co-host chair from beautiful Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. I love saying that, AJ. I hope you're enjoying life over there. We are 5 weeks into our commuted schedule, and we saw our first somewhat significant trade as Ottawa reacquired Ryan Dzingel in exchange for Cedric Piquette and Alex Galchenyuk, who was transferred on paper, at least, to Carolina, but then the Canes turned around and they sent Galchenyuk to Toronto for a couple of farm hands here, AJ. So I guess we got to get your thoughts. You saw Galchenyuk for a little while in Pittsburgh. He was a former number 3 overall draft pick by Montreal a number of years ago and has a couple of 30-goal seasons, a couple of 19-goal seasons on his resume. But in the last couple of years, his skill set seems to have gone MIA.
Yeah, I really, I think ever since he left Arizona, he just hasn't had something. I'm not totally sure what that something is. By all accounts, everything I've read and seen about his time in Pittsburgh, one of the hardest working guys on the ice, did everything he could, but just having trouble putting the puck in the net. You look in 2019, had 5 goals in 45 games with the Penguins, followed that up with 3 goals with Minnesota in 14 games. So really didn't do much there. And then just 1 goal in 8 games in Ottawa. And look, this is a bad Ottawa team. And we can talk about the disaster that happened last night, Paul. But in general, this is a bad Ottawa team. And he really struggled to crack the lineup for them. So as far as, the couple of trades here, look, I think Ottawa did a good piece of business there in getting Ryan Dzingel back. I think he'll be a great addition to their team. They gave up a guy that they basically just bought the contract of in Cedric Piquette, and a guy who wasn't playing in Alex Galchenyuk. So I think that was a good deal for Ottawa. Carolina, he probably wasn't going to crack the lineup there either. So he gets, I know it's, kind of minor depth guys that he got back from Toronto, but I think that's good value for a player that, never really suited up for you. So basically they turned Ryan Dzingel into Cedric Piquette in a pair of, AHL kind of depth guys. I think that's a good move for Carolina too. The one team that makes no sense to me in all this, and maybe you can help me understand, Paul, is, the Toronto acquisition. I would say the only thing that, helps them out is the fact that he already cleared waivers. So they can stick him on the taxi squad right away or even down in the minors without having to, put him on waivers again. But maybe you can explain to me, Paul, why Toronto wanted Alex Galchenyuk.
Well, I'll take a shot at this. They're banking on the pedigree of this draft status and the early part of his career, and they think they have a very good skill development department as a part of the club's processes here on the management side. So they're hoping that they can take a look at him and see if they can revive that aspect. It's a low-cost issue for them because, as you noted, they gave away a couple of farm hands. Korshkov was doing well in the KHL last season, and he started off decently this year. But again, a very low-level depth forward for the Leafs. And the other fellow was a depth defenseman, so he's going to be plying his trade in the Leafs farm system with the Marlies. So really another low-cost issue for the Leafs. He costs $1 million in terms of the salary cap issue that the Leafs have this year, and they still have a little bit of extra space there. So I don't think the Leafs are done in that regard, and they're looking to see who wants to emerge to grab one of the bottom 6 forward roles. They've got a luxury of rotating guys in and out every game, and they're motivated to stick with the roster. And you saw Travis Boyd last night score a goal. He's making a strong case for regular employment in that capacity. So it's a little competition that the Leafs are engendering, and Galchenyuk is now a part of that. And we'll see. It's like a lottery ticket. Let's see if they get anything out of it, AJ. So with that, we're going to jump into the regular portion of our show. But before we get into our analysis of the 31 teams, AJ, our friends at Owner's Box deserve a mention, and you've been doing such a great job. So take it away, buddy.
Hey, NHL fans, Owner's Box is here to reinvent the way you play fantasy sports this season. Owner's Box is not DFS. They're the first ever weekly fantasy sports platform that combines the best elements of the industry into one product. Owner's Box is a head-to-head elimination style format that keeps players engaged through live snake drafts, social interaction, and a new layer of strategy that allows you to become the ultimate fantasy GM. The best part about weekly fantasy sports is there's no long-term commitment. Users are able to draft a new team every single day and participate in different types of contests to keep the fantasy experience fresh and fun, so you're never out of the game. Compete with your opponent over 7 days of fierce competition and get paid out weekly. No more falling subject to unfair payouts, as up to 50% of users win money. Owner's Box also allows users to brand themselves and engage socially across the platform in multiple different ways. Add friends, create custom leagues, and rank up to elevate the trash talk and competition to the next level. Think you have what it takes to be a weekly fantasy guru? Head over to ownersbox.com and start making a name for yourself today. In honor of the NHL season, if you sign up free now, Owner's Box will match your first deposit up to $500. What are you waiting for? Head over to ownersbox.com/rotowire to claim your bonus and join the new wave of fantasy sports.
And AJ, you're a part of this new wave with the daily hits that you're doing at RotoWire to give people DFS tips. And we're going to do our usual function in that regard with our picks for FanDuel and DraftKings right at the end of today's episode. But I wanted to give you a nod and remind our listeners that they can look at this episode and see us live in the way we broadcast on YouTube at RotoWire Hockey, and they get your daily hits in that forum as well. And AJ, it's your turn to lead off with our rotation of going through the 31 teams. So tell me what's happening in Anaheim, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, from the injury front, there's not a lot of change, not a lot of difference there. They've had pretty healthy overall. Sonny Milano, Josh Manson, Brendan Cooley, all unavailable to them. John Gibson did briefly deal with a bit of a blip there, but didn't really miss any significant time. Team went 1-1 last week rather. And then, Isaac Lundstrom is maybe the one player to kind of take a look at. He had goals in back-to-back games during the week. Now, I would caution, obviously, those were his first 2 goals of the season. So it might be a little bit early to jump on that train. But has had over that stretch, kind of the 4 games, is averaging, looks about 2.5 shots per game. So that's certainly decent and a good starting point for him. If you're in a deeper format, maybe take a look. If you're in, maybe a more shallow format, probably a little bit too soon to jump on him, but just a player to monitor for you.
Yeah, and the best news out of that club is Max Comtois. He notched his 7th goal of the season in a 3-2 loss last night, AJ. So the youngster is finding his way into the lineup on a regular basis and making a good case for top 6 employment with the fact that he's leading the club in goal scoring so far this year. So that's a significant step for a guy who has a history with the Canadian junior program. Over in Arizona, this team completed a 7-game regular season series against St. Louis that was uninterrupted with play against any other team. A rarity. I don't think I've ever seen that in the NHL, going back even to the history of the 6-team NHL when I was a wee gaffer. So, AJ, that was a curious bit of scheduling. They did win 4 of the 7 games against St. Louis, culminating in a 1-0 shutout win on Monday. Darcy Kemper registering a 24-save shutout there. In terms of other players, Chychrun picked up 3 assists. This guy's emerging as a real force on the back end with the Coyotes. They already have a couple other guys that handle the offensive load, so that's a real plus for them. In every matchup that they have, they can put 3 capable offensive defensemen in the lineup. Connor Garland, 2 goals added onto his totals. He's emerging as a real key offensive piece here and just continues to run along. Drake Caggiula on the downside is on the IR with a lower body injury. That's a bit of a problem there because he's dependable veteran guy that they lean on, particularly on the offensive side of the game. Fellow that we're both familiar with, Phil Kessel, only 7 shots on goal in his last 5 games played, AJ, with 1 assist, and his minutes are down to about 15.5 per game in a third line role. And a -8. There's 8 games left on an 11-game homestand for this club. Another bit of curious scheduling for the team in the desert. Other bit of good news: Barrett Hayton has points in his last 2 games, and might you consider moving him ahead of Brassard on the depth chart there? Brassard, for his part, struggling again, pointless in his last 6 games played in that third line center role.
I feel like Derek Brassard and like Alex Galchenyuk are kind of in the same boat. Like they were doing really well. Yeah. They end up in Pittsburgh. They don't do great in Pittsburgh, and then the rest of their career kind of flames out, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, definitely a guy who's struggled the last couple of years. In Boston, things continue to roll on as you would expect. And guys like Brad Marchand, 2 goals and 1 assist. Patrice Bergeron, 1 goal and 2 assists. David Pastrnak, maybe that's the only surprise. No goals last week, just a mere 2 assists in 3 games. So, things are pretty much working for them. Both goalies split the workload. The one kind of weird thing we saw out of Boston, and, weird for them in what's already a weird season, is Tuukka Rask started 3 games in a row. Usually they've been splitting them back and forth. That doesn't mean there was anything wrong with Yaroslav Halak in his 1 game this last week. He pitched a shutout. So certainly everything coming up roses for them. They've had some lingering injury issues with Matt Grzelcyk and trying to get him fully fit and available, but it doesn't seem to really be impacting them in terms of winning games and producing offensively.
Yeah, well, Matt Grzelcyk is one of the guys they count on for that offensive contribution, but he's turning into a poor man's Torrey Krug. He just can't stay healthy. And when he's out of the lineup, they suffer for that because they haven't got too much offense from the back end other than Charlie McAvoy, who's having a very nice season for them. But I have to look at the rest of the depth chart and say I can't identify anybody else that I would pick here in the DFS from the back end. And maybe other than the top 3 forwards, I can't see who do I pick other than Marchand, Bergeron, Pastrnak. Curious note that you guys at RotoWire's headquarters, you've got Pastrnak listed now playing with David Krejci on a second line, along with Nick Ritchie, who's had a nice start to the season. That's a key bit of information for our DFS listeners, and to note that Jake DeBrusk, who has been a top 6 winger on this club, but more relegated into a second line role, has moved up to the top line. They're just trying to spread the wealth, because if you can ever shut down that top Bruins line, which is a challenge every night, you got a good chance to play this team. So that's something worth noting that caught my eye this morning, AJ. In terms of the next club up, we're going to talk about the Buffalo Sabres. They finally got to play their first game in February last night. 7 guys coming out of the COVID protocol this week, and Sam Reinhart also returns from his upper body injury. So it seems that they'll have all hands on deck pretty soon. The goalies have split the load for the early part of the season, but Linus Ullmark has been significantly better than Carter Hutton so far. If you're leaning in one direction or looking for a goalie who's going to get more work there, I would go with Ullmark. New centers that they added at the beginning of the season, Eric Stahl and Cody Eakin, both veterans, have underwhelmed so far, AJ. Stahl with 5 points, Cody Eakin with only 1. That's disappointing production. They'd like to develop those guys, see those guys develop into more point-producing centers in line with their career norms to help this offense chug along. But it seems like if you shut down Eichel, you're going to shut down the Sabres.
Well, and it's interesting to note, last night they went in with a bit of an underwhelmed defensive group. They didn't have Ristolainen, Montour, or McCabe, all of whom are, for sure top 6, if not top 4 guys for them. But McCabe and Montour were game time decisions heading into that one, so they should be back sooner rather than later. In Carolina, we mentioned, Cedric Piquette was the acquisition there for Dzingel. He comes in, plays, a pretty decent game for them last night when you consider what they want him for. 4th line role, dished out 5 hits last night. And so, that's about what you're asking for when you bring in a guy like Cedric Piquette for a bottom 6 role here. I would expect you'll see, more of that. I wouldn't expect a lot of scoring out of him. I don't project him to move into a top 6 unless there's injuries. But they had a good week in terms of production. Several guys over the course of the week, putting up some pretty big numbers. Brock McGinn, 4 goals in 4 games. Jordan Staal, 4 goals in 4 games. Teravainen, 5 points along that stretch. And most of that, with the exception of Staal, most of that is coming with the 5-on-5 play. All of Brock McGinn's points are 5-on-5. Staal had 3 of his 5 points come with the man advantage. So decent production in all levels of the game. I think this is a dangerous team that just added a new element in the way of Cedric Piquette.
Yeah, and one other thing there in terms of the lineup again that RotoWire shows, Andrei Svechnikov looks like he's been shuffled down to a third line left wing situation alongside Jordan Staal and Warren Foegele. That's an attempt to stretch this roster in terms of the depth on offense, because otherwise Svechnikov and Aho and Teravainen, that's pretty much all your offensive eggs in one basket as well. Another situation there. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing if Trocheck can get anything out of Nino Niederreiter. He's a rich man's version of Galchenyuk, I'll say. This guy's got much more skill and seems like more of a will to play, but just hasn't put it together like I think he will. And this is a really good situation for him to avoid the opponent's top checking and play with a guy who really can dish the puck in Trocheck. So keep an eye on Niederreiter's production going forward is my suggestion to our listeners. Up next, we talk about the Calgary Flames. They went 2-1 last week. Jacob Markstrom receiving for both wins there. What a free agent signing this guy was. I think the best one in the North Division, I would have to say. AJ really solidifying the Calgary net mining situation and penalizing Vancouver. It was addition by subtraction in this division when you think about what he means to both clubs. And no wonder Calgary's off to a better start than the Canucks, in my opinion. In terms of other players that are doing some things offensively, Andrew Mangiapane, 2 goals to add to his totals. He's fluctuated up in the top 6 on the right side and down in the right wing 3 role, which is where he is right now. So keep an eye on his movement. He gets some looks on the power play as well. I think a useful player in the Calgary depth chart, could be a cheap DFS option in the right matchup. Michael Backlund at center on the third line is listed as day-to-day with a lower body injury. Keep an eye on that situation because he too has moved up and down the roster. He's played some second-line center in the last little while as well for this club. Byron Froese is likely his replacement in any case. Milan Lucic has tallied more points than we're used to seeing out of him in the last couple of years, but still nowhere near worth the 5.25 cap hit through next season. So judge him accordingly. 6 points in 14 games played is the ledger so far this season. On the back end, Noah Hannafin was 5th overall draft pick in his draft class. I remember he was head and shoulders the top defenseman in that group, at least on paper. But he's not found his offensive game in the NHL. Still, he and Chris Tanev have really helped Mark Giordano to give this group a solid core on the back end, and really with an eye toward a defensive acumen. The veterans certainly sort of solidify that group, but again, not a very good DFS value play in my mind, Hannafin, at this stage.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one kind of note on Backlund, he was a game time call yesterday. Obviously didn't get into the game, but that has to have you considering him being, near returning. And so perhaps we will get him back sooner rather than later. In Chicago, the story continues to be Kevin Lankinen, who had another decent week, went 2-1 in 3 outings with a .917 save percentage. Meanwhile, Malcolm Subban had a decent showing himself in his one game, got a win there, .931 save percentage in that contest. And so really, the Blackhawks are rolling right now. I mean, they're a much better team than I think we expected. And that's really a surprise when you consider they don't have Jonathan Toews. They don't have Kirby Dach. They don't have Alex Nylander. They are probably going to be without Andrew Shaw after he sustained another concussion. You have to wonder if that's a career ender for him. And on the back end, no Brent Seabrook. Yet somehow this team continues to win. And a lot of that is due to, the kind of rookie phenom, if you will, Kevin Lankinen really stepping in to that role. And I would expect him to continue to see a heavy workload into the rest of the season here.
Well, we're seeing another youngster get a heavy workload, and that's Pius Sutter. He's playing first-line minutes for the Hawks at center, 3 points in his last 4 games, and really a surprise entrant into the Rookie of the Year race. He's among the top scorers among first-year players there. And Patrick Kane on the right side certainly having a hand in that success. And even on the second line, they're introducing Brandon Hagel. He's got 2 points in his last 4 games. So a couple of raw rookies are really contributing here. And then you can add Philip Kurashev on the third line, another youngster, fresh-faced kid who is chipping in offense. So they're retooling on the fly offensively. If they can have the same success, well, the defensive makeover, they're going to make some noise in this division. I didn't think they'd have a sniff of a playoff spot, but early success by some of these youngsters, including Lankinen, of course, who's carrying the flag for that group, that they might make Chicago a relevant team a lot longer than we figured this season, AJ. Up next, we're going to talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets. Of course, Patrick Laine's addition to the club is top bit of news most recently. Interesting for me that Cam Atkinson came to the defense of his coach, who Tortorella's been really feeling some barbs about the way he handles some of these players in controversial situations like Laine and Dubois. But Atkinson said, look, I've played for this guy a lot longer than those guys, and all he wants is an honest effort. And Atkinson's delivering that. 3 goals and 4 assists last week. Columbus went 2-0-1. Jack Roslovic really fitting in like a glove. 9 points in 9 games played before last night's action. Seth Jones finding his offensive game a little bit more than he was earlier in the season, chipping in with 3 assists. Even Kevin Stenlund has been a solid contributor with 5 points in his last 5 games. But the hope there is, can this guy stay healthy? He's been in and out of the lineup a little too much for my liking in season-long play anyway for fantasy owners. Joonas Korpisalo has struggled so far this season, folks, and it might be time to let Elvis Merzlikins have a string of games to see if he can continue his solid start by comparison. He's got a 276 goals against and a 913 save percentage in 6 starts. I'm surprised at this team's defensive struggles because they're more reflected in Korpisalo's numbers, which are well north of 3 per game, and they're giving up a lot of shots on goal, a lot more than I'm used to seeing out of this club.
Yeah, I would definitely agree there. You have to attribute some of that to not having Zach Werenski. He was out with a thigh injury, came back for 1 game and then was out again most recently. So it's definitely a concern there. And the problem is they haven't had Merzlikins to really be an option. He was banged up for a little bit there. Came in a relief appearance last night. Didn't really perform well in that outing, but it's hard to blame a guy when you come into a contest cold like that. And so I agree. I think they need to give him a look. And one concerning thing for me is the fact that the Laine and Roslovic additions have not really in any way helped Max Domi. I thought maybe some other guys maybe take the pressure off a little bit, especially when you consider on the power play, Domi might have some more space as they try and shade over to Laine's side with that wicked shot, but he's got no goals in his last 4 games, just 1 assist, despite logging, over 2 minutes a night on the power play. In fact, in 2 of those games, he didn't even record a shot. So there's definitely a concern there with Max Domi's production. I'll talk briefly about Colorado, but not much to discuss here. They only played 1 game last week, and they didn't score any points in that game. They got shut out 1-0. By the Golden Knights. So, I would say a pretty strong outing from Philip Grubauer. He only gave up 1 goal on 24 shots. And when you've got guys like McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen in front of you, you would certainly expect a 1-goal outing would be enough to get you a win. So obviously Landeskog was out as well, so he missed that game. But they still have no lack of talent, and that's really a disappointing contest. And they were really stymied by Marc-Andre Fleury in that one.
Yeah, they've got a few guys on the COVID list that are out of the lineup, including Landeskog, but they're going to be back in place by the time they play the games in Lake Tahoe. Looking forward to that situation, AJ, an NHL showcase that is one of the highlights of this year's schedule. In terms of the Dallas Stars, they had a 3-game schedule last week. They probably would have liked to have done better than they did. One loss and 2 overtime losses in the 3 games. Joe Pavelski is writing a great story here, though, and I'll beat you to the punch here, AJ, because I know you're a big fan of this guy, being a local sort. 17 points in his 12 games played. He's really wound back the clock. Two of those goals came last week, as this guy's off to a great start and fantastic DFS value play. I'll say night in, night out so far this season. Rupe Hintz adding his 2 goals and 1 assist. Jason Robertson chipped in with a goal and 3 helpers. he has a role as a left winger on the second line right now. That's a step up in class, and that's mostly due to the fact that Alexander Radulov is on the IR with a lower body injury, but he should be able to come off soon, we think. Joel Kiviranta moves up into the right wing role on the top line as well. He has 2 points in 4 games played so far this season, so keep an eye on him. Could be a real cheap DFS value play, at least in the near term. The trouble here is defensively, they're not as solid as they were last year. It's best reflected in Khudobin's struggles of late. He's allowed 15 goals in his last 4 games started. On the back end, though, some positive news. John Klingberg has turned up his offensive game to remind us that he was one of the best scoring defensemen in hockey not so long ago. He's up to 12 points in 12 games played so far this season. It's the best I've seen out of him in a few years, AJ.
Absolutely. I think, obviously you got to watch the Rupe Hintz situation and see if he'll be ready to play. Here it does look like it's trending in that direction, but obviously we'll have to wait and see. After that game was called off last night, they were supposed to play last night. He was a game time call, but due to weather, it's nice to see a game canceled for something as simple as weather, Paul, instead of all the other cancellations we've had. But I would imagine if he was a game time call for last night, as soon as they get back on the ice, he should be good and ready to go there. In Detroit, one kind of surprising development, at least over their last couple of games here, has been more Thomas Greiss than I think I would have expected. You look at, their last 4 games, Greiss got the start in 3 of them. Didn't really perform well in those 3, 0-2-1, a .884 save percentage. Jonathan Bernier, somewhat better at .931. He did get a win in that contest. So you have to wonder if they're going to maybe, try and even out the starts here a little bit. I admit to being a little surprised that they've been giving such a heavy workload to Greiss here. I know Bernier was injured for a little bit of that, but definitely surprising to me. In terms of offensive production, the one guy really lacking for them right now is Dylan Larkin, just 1 assist in his last 4. Bobby Ryan is in the same boat. They are getting a little bit of something out of Robbie Fabry, 2 goals and 1 assist over that stretch, and Luke Glendening, 1 goal and 2 assists. But let me tell you, if Luke Glendening is your, tied for your leading scorer in the last couple of games here, that's not a good thing for you. A fine player, but I mean, he's not a stud. You need Larkin, Ryan. Philip Zadina has 1 goal in those 4 games. I mean, these are the guys you expect to produce if this team's going to eventually, I'm not saying they're a playoff team yet, but eventually we want to see some progress, right? If you're a Red Wings fan, and it's really not there right now. Absolutely.
Well, they are who we thought they were. They're not a top team in the league, AJ, if I can borrow from a famous football coach's clip there. The Edmonton Oilers went 3-0 last week. Mike Smith was the talk of the town with 2 game starts and 2 wins and only 1 goal against, stopping 66 out of 67 shots. That was good news until last night when he gave up a 4 spot very early on and was pulled in a shootout loss against Winnipeg. Winnipeg was 6-5. They didn't go to overtime, but lots of goals there. That's what I mean. And Archibald and Kyra chipping in some secondary scoring here with 3 points apiece is a bit of a diversion from the usual notes about Draisaitl and McDavid. On the back end, Tyson Barrie adds 2 more goals. I don't even recognize this guy, AJ. He's playing with a freedom and confidence that I didn't see in Toronto at all last season. So good for him for reviving his own status. He bet on himself, to borrow a Fred Van Vliet axiom. And so far it looks like it's paying off in a big way. He signed a short-term deal and should be able to, if he continues to play this way, he'll hit a big ticket at the end of the year. Darnell Nurse is also a guy who's chipped in some offense with some regularity here. And I find that he's still a very cheap DFS value play. And that might be a tip-off to where I'm going in future dates, as long as he continues to roll along under the radar. Jessie Puliarvi is another guy who's been under the radar, looking a little more engaged and now up to a right-wing role in the top line. And this guy was a very high draft pick too, not so long ago. So I'm curious to see what his ceiling might be now that he's got a newfound confidence. Maybe a maturity is part of the development there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue against, what Edmonton's doing. They have everything, and they're finally getting a little bit of goaltending, which pains me to say. Our listeners know I'm not a big Mike Smith fan, but he seems to be performing well right now. They haven't really had to deal with a ton of injuries, a couple of bumps and bruises here, but for the most part, they've been a relatively healthy team. Another team that's avoided a lot of concerns on the injury front until recently is the Florida Panthers. Noel Asari will miss 7 to 10 days with an injury, but that's a bottom 6 guy for them. Not a huge impact. Gustav Forsling might be a slightly bigger impact for them after picking up an upper body injury. But his impact is not really in terms of fantasy. He's more of a defensive guy. So for our purposes, his absence won't impact them too much. We're starting to see some good net minding out of Sergei Bobrovsky. It's still not, above that 900 mark as you would like, especially considering that paycheck, but 2 wins and 1 loss in his last 3 contests. So that's really what ultimately matters. And then one guy who has just been lights out for them this year is Patrick Hornqvist. He's got 12 points in 13 games for them and seems to really be fitting in well. 6 points with the man advantage, which is where he's going to earn his paycheck most nights, being that net front pest.
And you know what? We have to say they're giving the Tampa Lightning a bit of a scare. They've taken 2 out of 3 in head-to-head matchups most recently, and they may be for real, AJ. I thought they'd take a step up in class, but I didn't think they'd challenge the defending champs here. They're neck and neck right now at the top of their division, and that makes for an interesting rivalry and interesting race the rest of the way if this continues. The Los Angeles Kings are also punching a little bit above their weight most recently. 1 win and 1 overtime loss last week, and it's the wily veterans that are leading the scoring. Anze Kopitar, 2 goals, 1 assist. Dustin Brown, 2 goals, 2 assists. Drew Doughty with 4 assists. Are we in 2021 or is it 2012, AJ? That's what I have to ask myself when I see the production here. But in other news, there's support players that are doing their bit. Adrian Kentby has had 2 4-game point streaks in the last 11 games played. He emerged last year as a consistent scorer, and basically what I'm telling you is he's continued that trend early this season. Cal Peterson has earned 5 straight starts in goal, most recently, outplaying Jonathan Quick by a wide margin. I don't think we'll see that ratio of game start splits between the 2 guys. It could be a win and you're in situation going forward, but don't count out Jonathan Quick. He hasn't really found his game early on this season, but I think that we're going to see a good stretch from him in the near term.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that, I think what they need more than anything else is to get Andreas Athanasiou back. He's really a big driver of their offense. Now, that's not to say they're not getting anything from anybody else. Dustin Brown, as you mentioned, had a really good week, and Drew Doughty, of course, but I think this team is just so much better with a player of his caliber available. Paul, you're sticking me with all the tough teams to talk about this week, as I'll take us into the Minnesota Wild, who haven't played any games since February 2nd. But there's some good news around that team. They are going to get Mats Zuccarello back. He came off IR yesterday, so that'll be a big one. That was not COVID related for him. He had that arm injury. And so, yeah, he immediately bolsters the top 6 here. Now, right now, we have Zuccarello on the second line with Marcus Johansson and Kirill Kaprizov, but that's all fluid. I mean, those line combinations might be a little bit more established today. As they continue to get guys coming back from protocols, things are just going to keep changing. So I would definitely recommend, if you're going to use any of these Minnesota guys, especially if you want to take a flyer on a guy like Kaprizov or Fiala, who's maybe not quite as break the bank as some of the other players on this team, you're going to have to check back at those line combinations, probably as close to puck drop. If they'll skate today and we'll update them, but they could even change when the team comes out for warmups. But definitely trending in the right direction coming out of that COVID protocol for the Wild.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's not a lot to pick from in terms of the offensive depth here, in terms of DFS value, in my opinion, as well. But on defense, there's 3 guys that I lean on when they're healthy. And you can add Jared Spurgeon to that list because he has been out of the lineup most recently, expects to come in for the next game as well. So it's him, Dumba, and Ryan Sutter that carry the most of the offensive mail for these guys. And all 3 of them are viable options in DFS value play for me. In terms of the next club up, it's the Montreal Canadiens, and they had a 2-game set with the Maple Leafs that they split, with each team winning in the other team's barn. But the Canadiens are suffering through a bit of a team-wide goal-scoring slump most recently. Look at the four centers here, AJ, not scoring at all, in my opinion, to date, even with the early success of the club. 6 total goals from that quartet. They don't play until next Saturday in a rematch against Toronto, and so we'll see if they have solved any of those mysteries. I hope that they take another day off before they do. Paul Byron's stock particularly is plummeting here as he was placed on waivers. The guy carries a $3.4 million cap hit for the next 2 seasons, so I guess they would like to solve that situation. If he's not going to produce, they got to find a way to move him. But after a nice start too, Shea Weber has no points in his last 5 games played. That's a bit of an alarming thing if you're an owner of the veteran captain in Montreal. Goes hand in glove with the fact that they're not scoring as a team. Yoel Armia is the only guy with an injury note on the club, and that's a positive turn most recently as he returned to the lineup in his last game played. So no current guys on the sidelines to report. So all hands on deck. I look for Montreal to rebound and find their early season groove before too long.
Well, I have to wonder if the concerns about moving cross borders is what convinced no teams to really snatch Paul Byron. Look, $3.4 million against your cap is certainly not cheap, but for a player of his caliber, I'm surprised that he cleared waivers. I think in a normal year where you could expect him to come in pretty quickly and join the team right away, I would have thought maybe somebody would try and snag him and get him for free and hope that they can find the guy who put up 22 goals, 20 goals from 2016 and in 2017. So I admit to being a little surprised that he cleared. I know we're in a tough cap year with the flat cap, but 3.4 is not outrageous there. And so I was a little surprised to see him make it through. Again, I'll talk about the New Jersey Devils, who haven't played any games since February 2nd. For them, it's similar things. We're starting to see guys coming back. Still the one guy who has really taken a while to get back here is Mackenzie Blackwood. The team has been off, their last game January 31st, but Blackwood hasn't played since January 19th, and I doubt we're going to see him right away. It sounds like he was pretty hard hit from COVID in terms of having a little bit of trouble breathing and stuff. So I imagine that it'll be a few more games before we even see Blackwood available for them. But they're getting most of the guys back, including Jack Hughes, Pavel Zacha down the middle, Andreas Johnson, Jesper Bratt. But again, these lines are fluid. You're going to have to check back and see what shuffles around as they get more guys coming off the COVID protocols.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in Andreas Johnson because he has some ties to Toronto with the early part of his career. 2 goals and 1 assist in 9 games, but that offense all came in the last 4 games that he played. So he was just starting to get comfortable in this lineup, and I look for big things from him. I think he's going to be one of the offensive catalysts going forward. Next up on our list, we're going to look at the Nashville Predators, a team that has really been noted for defensive strength in the past, but it's not been there this season. Surprising for me. They went 1-3 last week. Rocco Grimaldi, 2 goals to lead the offense, getting 11 or 12 minutes. I think that number is going to rise because he's one of the secondary scorers that started to produce a little bit and deserves a bit of a longer look. Dante Fabro is fitting into the mold of this defenseman development factory here. 2 goals and 2 helpers last week for him. Ryan Johansson has missed the last 5 games with an upper body injury. I would say he's missed all the games this season. He's not performed very well at all, AJ, but he's listed week to week, and that's a concern for this depth chart. Luke Kunin on the flip side returned to the lineup last week and will get a long look as a scoring line center in Johansson's absence. So I can be curious to see if Kunin could actually steal that role and maybe create a bit of an internal competition there to get the best out of both players going forward. On the back end, a troubling note, Matthias Eckham was moved on to the IR. It's an undisclosed injury, and it's listed, according to the coach's comments, as a week-to-week concern. So it's not something that's going to be an imminent return for one of the stalwarts on the back end for the Predators.
Yeah, with both of those injured guys, so Ryan Johansson, he'll miss at least 2 more. He is traveling with the team, but he won't play against Dallas. They had last night and tonight against Dallas. So he's out those 2 games. Matthias Eckham isn't even making the trip. So he'll miss, I think it was about 6 games over that stretch. Their next home game is not until February 27th. So he's facing a pretty long situation away. Obviously, if he improved quicker than expected, he could travel and join up with the team. But the fact that he didn't make the initial trip is certainly a concern. And look, you mentioned Dante Fabro. I believe on Tuesday in our DFS segment, I called him my toss-in guy. And that's the one game he didn't score in last week. He had after Tuesday's game, which, for a guy that you call the toss-in, he had 4 shots on goal, put up 7.3 points on DraftKings. That's not terrible. But the next game he scored a goal. The game after that, he had 2 helpers. So apparently I had the right guy, just the wrong night in terms of Dante Fabro there. We'll look at the New York Islanders next. 2-0-1 during the week, largely on the back of Jean-Gabriel Pageau, who had 3 goals. Casey Cizikas had 2 goals, and Barzal 2-1. So they're getting production down the middle, but not a whole lot out of guys like Anders Lee, Josh Bailey, even Jordan Eberle. They've been out without Anthony Beauvillier, who they are expecting back, I think, sooner rather than later. Monday was originally, I had seen that was his target to come back Monday. That didn't happen. But I think things are trending in the right direction, and that will certainly bolster their top 6. And then Simeon Varlamov continues to thrive, these last couple of games here, and he's started 5 in a row. And that means, Ilya Sorokin really has been relegated to the backup role, which I'm not sure we expected. If you go back even further, Sorokin has started 8 of their last 9 games. Varlamov has started 8 of their last 9 games. And so a little surprising to see how little they've been using Sorokin of late, but certainly his numbers to start the year have warranted him being relegated to that 2nd spot.
Yeah, much hype around him all preseason, AJ. I thought he was going to be odds on to be at least a share of the net mining situation, but maybe he's still getting acclimatized, so don't throw him out. He's a good stash candidate in terms of your depth charts on season-long fantasy behind a team that has a real good, sound defensive structure like the Islanders. If he gets his footing, he should be fine there eventually.
I should mention, Paul, real quick, he is expected to start tonight, so he will get in between the pipes after Varley, like I said, heavy workload of late.
Okay, so we'll see maybe if the light goes on this evening for Sorokin in a positive way to get some traction on his early season. The New York Rangers, a team that was getting some traction last year in terms of the development of some of the youngsters, they went 0-2-1 last week. And let's focus on some of those youngsters. Kaapo Kakko, only 3 points so far this year. Alexis Lafreniere with only 1 so far, yet both are listed as second-line wingers around Ryan Strome, who's a pretty good distributor of the puck. I thought that would be a great situation for both these guys, but they're really struggling right now, and I don't have an answer for that, AJ, quite frankly. These are 2 uber-skilled wingers, the youngsters, that really finding it a tough go in the NHL right now, and I guess part of it has to do with the fact they're in a very tough division as well. So hopefully they get their acts together. We want to see whether they can approach the ceilings that are expected of them. Certainly, I had more faith in Kakko, a little more experience under his belt. Lafreniere in his first go around the league will give him a little more rope. Yeah, in terms of the net minding, Shesterkin has far outplayed Georgiev in the nets, and that too is a bit of a surprise. I didn't think there was much of a disparity in the form charts for both these guys, but there it is. If you're looking for a goalie out of the 2 to emerge, I'd bet on Shesterkin to continue his run. It'll be without Artemi Panarin at the other end of the ice filling the net, though, because he's dealing with a minor lower body injury. So keep an eye on that situation, because he's one of the top producers when he's healthy. And if he's not, you could be blowing a lot of money on DFS of just throwing darts at a board here. And you can add Heedle to that COVID list, another guy, youngster, who is expected to be a linchpin of this offense going forward. But in addition to his upper body injury, he's expected to miss a couple of weeks, and that's going to hurt his development in the near term for sure.
Yeah, Paul, plenty of guys struggling for offense here last week. You mentioned a couple. I'll throw in Keandre Miller, no points. Pavel Buchnevich, no points. I mean, really, Chris Kreider, nothing. Mika Zibanejad, nothing. I mean, there's clearly a theme here. The top 6 is not producing right now. And that's why they didn't win any games last week. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If your only goals are coming from Kevin Rooney and Julien Gauthier, it's not going to work out too well for you. Now, that's a pretty good line. You know, Brendan Lemieux 2 assists in that stretch too. So that's one positive if you want to find it, that you're getting some depth production, but that's only a positive when you're getting production out of the top guys. In Ottawa, we've seen a little bit more of Marcus Hogberg lately after Matt Murray picked up an injury. Hogberg has wins in back-to-back games, so maybe he can play his way into a little bit heavier workload here. Now, of course, that win, talking about last night, he did give up 5 goals in that one, so obviously not the best performance, but good enough to get the win, and that's really what you're asking for. You have to wonder, Paul, with how that game went, you almost wonder if Murray had been available, if they would have pulled Hogberg early on. You know, most of his struggles came early in the game, so you have to wonder if maybe that kind of benefited them. Now, I mentioned the addition of Ryan Dzingel off the top. I think the one concern about that is we saw how long it took Pierre-Luc Dubois to get into the lineup based on, you know, COVID protocols and everything entering Canada from the U.S. So you have to assume Ryan Dzingel is going to face a full 14-day quarantine, and that's certainly a big chunk of games that he'll miss over that stretch. So don't really expect to see him until March unless something changes in terms of, you know, what the local health authorities will allow there.
Yeah, good call, AJ. The Flyers, you didn't get all the teams that were blanked last week in terms of game action. The Flyers are another one. So they expected to resume on Thursday of this week. I want to take some time to look at the goalie stats. Brian Elliott's far outplayed Carter Hart, and I don't think there's anybody who was an NHL pundit who would have seen this, but it's by a wide margin too. That wasn't expected, but in the long run, AJ, that's probably a bonus for this club because we expect Hart to find his game and get back to the level he played with last year. I don't expect the trend to continue for Elliott either, so they could meet somewhere in the middle. In terms of other notable players for me, watching Shane Gostisbehere, 2 shots on goal per game, he's up that over the last season, and he's a +4 on the season as well. So those numbers bode well for a guy who's hoping to recapture the career trajectory that he had a couple of seasons ago. It's been in the doldrums since then and not a viable option in season-long play in that term. Up front, Scott Laughton is a guy that doesn't get the same publicity as a lot of other name recognition types here, but look at the numbers. 9 points in 13 games played. A very good, sneaky DFS value guy for me when you compare him in a bit of a Philadelphia stack. The way this team is playing, one of the best teams in this division.
Yeah, I won't add much to that. As you said, no games last week. So I'll talk about former Philadelphia Flyer, Ron Hextall, who has got 2 wins in 2 games, running the GM show along with Brian Burke as the Pittsburgh's new front office hires. Good start for them, obviously. I think what's interesting is, you know, the goalie situation in Pittsburgh. We have to talk about the fact that Tristan Jarry hasn't really been stellar of late, not nearly the caliber of player he was last year. And that's seen Casey DeSmith get more opportunities. And by all accounts, DeSmith was going to start Sunday's game against the Capitals before coming down with a non-COVID illness. So Tristan Jarry kind of thrust into action as a result. You know, I think the most interesting thing about this is because of those kind of struggles, I've seen not only Marc-Andre Fleury, who will always be linked to Pittsburgh, right? Anytime it's like, oh, there's goalie problems in Pittsburgh, could they get Fleury to come back? I imagine even after retirement, that conversation will still happen. You know, oh, could they convince Fleury to unretire? But they also were linked to Pittsburgh native John Gibson this week as a potential, target for the team to bring in a more veteran, established presence on the goal line. So it'll be interesting to watch what Brian Burke and Ron Hextall do. Obviously, Jarry and DeSmith are not their guys. And so a lot of times you see some shakeup there.
AJ, I think we can spend a minute or two more on the Penguins because of this shakeup.
Oh, if you insist, Paul.
In the front office, I'm curious to pick your brain about the direction you think they're going to take, because let's look at the contract situation of a couple of the star players, Malkin and Letang. Their contracts expire at the end of next year, I believe, AJ, and not too far beyond that, Sidney Crosby as well. And there has been a lot of noise about Sidney Crosby, particularly north of the border, AJ, that I'll share with you, that he's had apparently, well, we know he has a strong friendship with Nate McKinnon, and he would like another run at a cup if it doesn't happen in Pittsburgh. Is there any talk about shuffling the deck in terms of some of the real key leaders on this club? I mean, the window of opportunity to get a cup in Pittsburgh seems to me the end of next season is kind of a deadline here before they start to really make some key decisions. What are your thoughts, and what's been shared so far locally?
Well, here's the deal. I think anybody that would even walk into Mario Lemieux's office and say, hey, I set up a trade to send Sidney Crosby out, I think you'd be fired on the spot. That has been the clearest situation. Mario Lemieux has, by all accounts, expressed disappointment, frustration on how things were handled with his, number 2 guy, Jaromir Jagr. And so to that end, he will do and has committed to doing everything he can that Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin finish their careers in Pittsburgh. By all accounts, Malkin is, after this deal, looking for a 3-year contract with the team that will set him up to be there for the same duration of Sidney Crosby's current contract. And then that will reportedly be it for Malkin. Now, whether that's the end of the line for Crosby remains to be seen, but I don't foresee a situation in which he would not be back in Pittsburgh. I'm not imagining we're going to see a Tom Brady-esque move to Colorado. I will admit that Colorado probably makes more sense than anywhere else because of that friendship with Nate McKinnon, but we're talking about 5 years from now in terms of that. The one guy that is not linked in for that future is Kris Letang. Reportedly, they would have to get approval from Lemieux on gracefully handling a trade and an exit and everything, but it's not off the table that Lemieux could be traded. And so I fully expect him to not finish out that contract next year. I'd be surprised if it happened this year. Look, 7.25 is a lot to eat mid-season, plus you have travel restrictions and all that. So I imagine Letang finishes out this year, but over the summer, I wouldn't be surprised to see something in the works and to see him shipped out.
All right, AJ, I gave you your platform. Let's get back into the groove here and the rest of the clubs. San Jose was 1-2 last week, and they won last night as well. So they're on a bit of a better streak than they were in the early part of the season. Hurdle has been a leader offensively most recently. He snapped a 5-game goalless drought with 3 goals last week. Surprising contributor to the whole mix is Nikolai Nissoff, an undrafted Russian defenseman from the KHL. 2 assists last week and gaining confidence with more consistent playing time. He's been afforded that opportunity because they just can't trust Erik Karlsson. It seems that the veteran's off to yet another poor start. The plus-minus is ugly, and now he may be sidelined with a lower body injury. Devan Dubnyk has a lower body injury too, and Marty Jones has allowed at least 3 goals in each of his last 6 starts before last night. So it was a bit of a blip last night to see that total lower than usual, but there are still some concerns on the defensive side of the puck here in San Jose.
Well, yeah, fortunately for them, they did get Dubnyk back as the backup last night, so I would expect we're going to see them splitting the workload, him and Marty Jones, the rest of the way. And Jones has been unreliable at best, as you mentioned, and was called out by the coach after giving up those 6 goals to the Kings on February 11th there. Basically said it's not good enough. It's not up to our standards. So, I think there's an opening for Dubnyk to even potentially take over full time as the number one a little bit more heavily if he can, come off this injury in positive form. In St. Louis, the injury concerns are starting to pile up a little bit here. Some of it started as more depth guys when you have, Marco Scandella out, but then Torrey Krug picks up an injury. Jaden Schwartz is been unavailable. Sammy Blais, obviously Robert Thomas has been out for a little while. So it is starting to become a concern. Now, they've had a decent production out of the guys that are filling in those top six, talking about Ivan Barbashev, 2 goals. Ryan O'Reilly is producing, David Perron as well. And so fortunately for them, those guys are stepping up. But Mike Hoffman, who I think they wanted ideally to drive a third scoring line, is now being forced into a top six because of all these injuries and absences. And that's certainly a concern for them. Fortunately, they can rely, if they don't have the offense, they can rely on Jordan Binnington on the back end as he continues to put up solid numbers. You look at his last 3 games, yes, a 1-1-1 record, not exactly stellar, but a 1.65 goals against average. So about what you can ask out of him, and you're going to need that offense to really carry it from there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Binnington in the nets, AJ. Toward the latter part of last season, he was starting to struggle a little bit, but I think he's back on top of his game and playing to an expected level. So anybody that had concerns at the end of this last season should feel good about the youngster's start to a third NHL campaign. Not bad. The guy's got a Stanley Cup ring so early on. I'm pumping the tires of a local product here, AJ. Let me go. The Tampa Lightning, this is a team that doesn't need anybody pumping their tires, but as I said, they have a pursuer in Florida with the Panthers. Their offense, look at the numbers. It's the same guys doing it. Palat with 5 points, Point with 6 points, Hedman with 5, Sergachev even with 5, and Stamkos with 4 last week. So the offense is coming along. Even a youngster, Matthew Joseph, making a bit of a case for himself in the top 6, picking up 3 goals and 1 assist. And Tyler Johnson, a guy that was cast away on the waiver wire, has resumed his key role in the lineup now at second-line center because of the fact that Cirelli is expected to miss a couple of weeks with an upper body injury. That's a bit of bad news for the club. Vasilevsky started and excelled in 12 of 13 games this team has played to date, and he actually can't be expected to play at that rate going forward. So I expect to see McElhinney getting a few more starts going forward, and maybe get the veteran a bit of a rest, because it looks like he's getting a little tired in the last couple of starts.
I don't know how much rest they're going to want to give Vasilevsky when you look at what happened last night.
Yeah.
McElhinney, 6 goals allowed on 21 shots. Not exactly a banner performance by him.
Exactly.
But look, the biggest concern for the rest of the league here, you mentioned the Panthers are working on tracking them down. Last night's win certainly helps. But they're doing all this without Nikita Kucherov, who by all counts, while he'll miss the regular season, they were very clear in that he would miss the regular season. Can you imagine Tampa winning this division and then heading into the playoffs, adding Nikita Kucherov? Like, that's just going to be unfair, to be totally honest with you. That's just not right. I'll take the lead here on your Maple Leafs, but I'll certainly let you talk. Although maybe you don't really want to talk about them after what happened last night, that would be understandable. In terms of the offensive guys, Austin Matthews continues to just roll over everybody right now. I think a candidate for, certainly a candidate for the Hart Trophy. An argument could be made there, and I wouldn't be shocked to see it. A little bit of disappointment, if you want to find it, in Tavares not having any goals in his last 4 games, but 3 assists over that stretch. So, what are you complaining about really there? And then Jumbo Joe comes back from injury, gets a goal and an assist, and really turning back the clock in a top 6 role for them.
Yeah, I think you're going to start to hear more concerns about Willie Nylander. He's dragging down that second line, and looks like he's just figure skating out there, not involved in the play much lately, and that's reflected in both his lack of goal scoring and Tavares of late. They need somebody to help drive that line, and I think it was a key move to put Hyman back on that unit with Jumbo Joe going back to the top 3. It was crazy the way that that top line was just dangling the puck though last night in the early part of that game. I thought they were going to score 10 goals against Ottawa the way it started out, but of course it turned into another ugly loss in a pantheon that goes along with a couple of 5-goal comebacks that the Leafs have seeded in times that I've been watching them over a long number of years. But try to file that one away. It goes up there with the Zamboni driver of last year loss and a couple other historical blowout losses as well. But there's been more good news than bad. When I look at the standings, they're still number one overall, so I'm happy with that. The Vancouver Canucks, 1-2 was the record last week. They snapped a 5-game skid all on the road when they came home on Saturday to beat Calgary, so that was a boon for them because the local media has been all over this club. I know people are excited on the positive side with Quinn Hughes' offense. He leads all defensemen with 18 points, but he gives most of that back with an ugly -12, though, doesn't he? Beau Horvath holding down the number 2 center role as the captain of this club, only 2 points in his last 10 games played. I mean, people were talking about Elias Pettersson and his lack of scoring. Well, at least he's off the schneid with 10 points in his last 10 games played. The first line is humming while the second one is struggling. This team gives up more shots on goal than any other in the league except the Hawks, and neither Holtby or Demko has been very much positive to say about either one of them so far this season. Unless they get the defensive side of this team righted, it doesn't matter who's scoring up front.
Yeah, I'm really surprised how disappointing both Holtby and Demko have been this season. You know, I thought this could potentially be one of the top goalie tandems in the league. You've got an established cup-winning veteran coming in to really tutor the heir apparent who has, you know, a pretty good pedigree based on previous work. And so I expected a lot more out of this goalie tandem. You mentioned that some of it is the defensive problems, and certainly that is to blame, but I would expect, you know, a guy like Braden Holtby should be better. There's no argument in my mind that he should be better. Speaking of a guy who has been significantly better, when we talk about Vegas, we have to talk about Marc-Andre Fleury. Robin Lehner has been unavailable for them, and so they've relied heavily on Fleury, including having him take both ends of a back-to-back over the weekend. You'd expect maybe a drop in production in that second game when you consider not only going for a second straight night, but going up against Colorado and their offensive firepower. Well, he stops all 30 shots for a shutout. Look, this guy continues to just climb the ladder here in terms of the all-time wins. Needs 11 more to pass Ed Belfour, 16 more wins to move into third with Roberto Luongo. I would not be surprised to see him get there. And right now, if you look at the most recent odds, Marc-Andre Fleury leading the way as potential Vezina Trophy winner in terms of Vegas odds. So I don't know what they do when they get Lehner back. You have a world-class goalie playing at an elite level. Do you really risk messing with that by giving Robin Lehner starts? Now, I know you've committed to Lehner for the future, but technically he's the less paid of the two guys when you consider he's making $2 million a year less than Fleury. So it's going to be a tough choice for Pete DeBoer here. I know what I would do. Paul, what would you do in this goalie tandem?
You got to win and you stay in. I think you got two guys that you can really trust, and nobody's hotter right now than Marc-Andre Fleury. So you hand him the reins and say, okay, veteran star, go ahead and continue to do your thing. When you get tired, we'll put in Lehner, and then Lehner's going to have his run too. So I don't think you need to alternate these goalies unless the schedule dictates it. Go with the hot hand is what I would say. And in terms of I want to also say a nod to the center ice situation here, which I thought was a bit of a concern at the start of the season. We've seen a steady development and improvement in Chandler Stevenson, who's looking for all the world like a very good option as the number one center, but playing with Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty has certainly helped. Nonetheless, Stevenson remains a good DFS value play at the moment, and you can almost make the same case for Cody Glass. I thought we'd see a shot for him to accelerate his development here, and that's happening. He picked up 3 assists last week too, and is holding down the third line center role and really stretching the offense of this roster as he combines with Alex Tuch and Keegan Colasar on that third line in Vegas. I think this is still one of the powers in the league, and the depth at center is a big reason why. In Washington, they were limited to only one game last week. It was a loss, and so we haven't got much to talk about this team, but a couple of observations that I'll make is Zdeno Chara continues to do Zdeno Chara things and really settling down the defensive structure here. Formed a really nice partnership with Justin Schultz. The veteran pairing has helped Schultz rediscover a bit of an offensive side to his game. 7 points in 9 games played. You didn't see that in any of his time in Pittsburgh, did you, AJ? I don't think so. I see you shaking your head. And meanwhile, Tom Wilson still proving to be the NHL's unicorn, one of the top tough guys in the league, is playing at better than a point per game pace and a really good DFS value play as long as he continues to have that role. I think he's a lock for it, and he will be in my lineup tonight. I'll tease that. Another bit of good news, Ilya Samsonov is out of the COVID protocol, but instead of putting him right into the lineup, they want to give him a stint in the AHL before he starts an NHL game. So it's Vanacek who's going to continue to start with Craig Anderson in goal as his backup.
Yeah, I think the one kind of concern for this team is in their couple matchups with the Penguins, they've honestly just looked slow. And they've gotten to the third period, and the team looks kind of gassed. Carl Hagelin is probably the fastest player on this group, and he's certainly on the back half of his career and seems to have lost a step. That's not to say that they can't win games and continue to do well. I'm not saying it's gloom and doom for them. I just think matchups against faster skill teams are going to be hard for them this season. And it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the Pittsburgh-Washington series goes this year because they have been just that much faster. And I think this could cause problems with other teams like the Rangers are another kind of fast team in that division that could give them some fits. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to make the playoffs. They're certainly a top team. But it's something to watch, that's for sure. I'll round us out with a look at the Winnipeg Jets. As expected, Connor Hellebuyck continues to just take all of the net minding duties here. Played in all 4 of their games, went 2-2 over that stretch with a .924 save percentage there. They're starting to move things around. They had Pierre-Luc Dubois in for a little bit, then he suffered a lower body injury that has kept him out 2 more games. So really hasn't had a chance to fit in with this team yet. And that's definitely a concern. But when you have guys like Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, who are back together again, they broke them up briefly to try that 3-line experiment. But without Dubois as that third center, I don't see any reason to split those guys up. And so it makes sense to put them back together on that top line.
Yeah, you know what? I've been saying for weeks now, I think we know who's going to challenge the Leafs and Canadiens for a top spot in this division. I think it's this team right here. They got a wealth of options offensively, and I love the depth on the defense a lot more than they did earlier in the season, AJ. That's looking to me like a lot more solid group. And, of course, they got the defending Vezina winning goalie in the nets there. So a lot to like about this team, and they'll be a tough out game in, game out. That takes us through the wrap of the NHL teams. And it wraps up this episode of podcast. Thanks for listening to us, gang. RotoWire Signature Hockey Podcast, Statsman with Statsman and AJ, with the support of our sponsors at Owner's Box. Please remember to send your comments or questions on Twitter. Follow me, Paul Bruno, at Statsman22, and you can follow AJ at AJ Scholes24. Don't forget, you can watch this pod on YouTube at RotoWire Hockey. And as always, we invite you to hang on and look for our DFS segment, which is coming up shortly. And don't forget to send us your questions and comments. Stay in touch to get your tips to stay out of the competition in our fantasy hockey planning and research. All right, so we'll take a break. We'll be back shortly with the DFS segment, folks.
Please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.